I always kind of start with the lens with my patients, which is like, let's find out if this is what you actually need. Right? Are there holes even in your current supplementation regimen? And that becomes the starting point to say, do you need supplements? Do you not need supplements? So it's always kind of going to start with some sort of testing. And in the supplement space, that it's going to focus a lot on micronutrients.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Melanie Johnson, your host today at Elite Expert Insider. All right, health, wellness, longevity. I have been all over this. Last year I kept saying I was biohacking my life, trying to figure out at my age, I'm 63, so trying to figure out how to dial everything in, tweak it, see what works, see what it didn't work, but it's so confusing out there. Today we have William Haas, who is really an expert. He's been doing this, I think he said for like 15 years. So that's a long time. And he's a young guy. So, and he looks great. So unless he tells me he's 70 and he looks this good. But I just want to say, so I have a lot of questions because I've been confused by so many different things on the internet, so many different things by different doctors and different trendsetters of what to believe. So we're going to try and get some clarity today. Thanks, William, for joining us.
Yeah, love it. Happy to be here.
So how did you even go from like traditional medicine, so to speak, going down this road?
So one of the unique things about my background is I never really had this like rebirth, if you will, in terms of going from traditional medicine to how I currently practice. In fact, one of my mentors, Dr. Andrew Wild, said that he doesn't really think, he wishes there wasn't such a thing as integrative medicine or the field of integrative medicine. He just thinks that's the way good medicine should be practiced. And that was something that kind of stuck with me very early on in my career when I was thinking about becoming a physician. And I had always been more attuned and interested into how do we tap into the body's innate ability to heal itself without necessarily using medications. And so that was always my lens and framework. Coming from my background as an athlete, I was always curious about how do we enhance and dial in our nutrition and our supplementation and our recovery to achieve higher levels of performance. And so that was always my lens of thinking, and never really from this kind of traditional sense of conventional medicine where here's a prescription for these symptoms or this ailment, but more of how do we live into the body in such a way that it's tapping into that innate healing response.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Traditional medicine was always trained of what's the pill or the surgery we can give you versus what is a shift that you can make in your diet, your nutrition, your supplementation. It's just been a big shift over these years. So let's talk about supplementation. Do we need supplements? Should we take supplements? Are we just peeing them out and there they go?
I think it always starts with understanding what the body actually needs, right? And so instead of guessing or following the latest trend on Instagram or whatever ad is being served up to you, you're scrolling, I always kind of start with the lens with my patients, which is like, let's find out if this is what you actually need, right? So in my practice, if you're just looking at fundamentals, a lot of my patients are always going through advanced micronutrient lab testing, right? A panel of almost 60 plus micronutrients just to look at the status of your micronutrients, to understand, are there holes in your dieting? Are there holes even in your current supplementation regimen? And that becomes the starting point to say, do you need supplements? Do you not need supplements? So it's always kind of going to start with some sort of testing. And in the supplement space, that it's going to focus a lot on micronutrients. But ultimately...
So how is that different than regular blood work? So like I get regular blood work. I've got like something, I take it like 3 to 4 times a year and get my blood tested, but I don't see anything about micronutrients on there. They'll say we're testing for 50 or 100 biomarkers or whatever, but not except for vitamin D maybe or vitamin B, I don't see anything.
Yes, but to say if you're lucky, you're getting vitamin D and B12, maybe magnesium, but many times I see the forms of the micronutrients with the wrong lab test associated with it. So if you are lucky enough to get a provider who looks at magnesium levels, many times they're looking at the wrong place. Magnesium lives inside the cells. So you need a specific type of magnesium marker called a red blood cell magnesium marker. So beyond the 3 to 4 micronutrients, we're missing patterns on all of your B vitamins, right? And you're missing patterns on amino acids, antioxidants. And from those patterns, we can then start to glean information on how your body's detoxification pathways are working, how your body is handling oxidative stress or this kind of like rust development that happens when your body's working in overdrive
Yeah.
to produce energy? Or are you seeing patterns of inflammation? So from those micronutrients, sometimes you're worried about specific isolated micronutrient deficiencies, and sometimes we're looking at patterns that then tell us to go a different direction, looking for more testing, right? So if we have a complement of different B vitamin deficiencies and iron missing, you might be wondering whether you're having an issue with digestion and absorbing things. And then we need to go down the route of looking at gut health. So there's kind of one part patterns in the micronutrients that we're looking at, one part individual micronutrients.
Yeah. Where do you get this test? I don't know if I asked my regular doctor or what.
Luckily, a lot of direct to consumer lab testing happening now, as well as finding yourself partnered with a good functional or integrative medicine physician that will have access to a lot of these advanced lab testings. But if you're out there trying to figure it out on your own, like Function, and a lot of my patients will even come in with their Function Health labs that will cover some of these things. It may not go as in depth as a well-trained functional medicine practitioner because they're trying to cater to a broad audience online, and it's not completely dialed into this sort of lab testing. But on those panels, you're going to find some of the more advanced micronutrient testing that we had talked about. You'll find things like your omega fatty acid levels. You'll find some of the appropriate magnesium markers that we talked about. But they're doing a really great job of also pivoting and offering other types of tests that you need to look into. For instance, toxin testing. Right? It's not uncommon on some of those lab panels to see things like lead and mercury and cadmium. You need to make sure that you address and identify whether there are toxins blocking your ability to do something with the supplements that you're adding into your body.
Yeah, and I've done Function Health. I think I did 2 panels with them. And then I've done Life Force, where they do it every quarter. And Life Force started out giving you all of this stuff. And then they went, oh, now we're going to charge extra for that. So your panel's not near as elaborate as it used to be. Yeah. I don't know if you like one more than the other, but really it sounds like Function Health maybe gives you more of those micronutrients, but you still need to go just try and find a place that'll give you a complete in-depth micronutrients panel. Sounds like the best bet.
Yeah, I'm always going to advocate if you can find a functionally integrative trained practitioner in your city, that they'll be able to, there's the whole kind of concept of 10,000 hours to become an expert, right? So, many of these functional medicine practitioners and physicians and doctors have spent 10,000 hours doing the conventional thing and another 10,000 hours doing the functional medicine piece. And from those stories of those 10,000 hours, you're able to clue into pieces before you just have to shotgun a bunch of labs. And to your point, like by the time you get all the lab panels that you want in the direct consumer space, you've racked up a few hundred or a few $1,000s over the course of the year. Whereas a seasoned and a skilled clinician who has multiple hours of working with different patients, they can clue into, no, we really need to start here with your lab testing. Like, don't actually worry about the micronutrients, even though I got done talking about that. We should go and focus on your gut health first, right?
Yeah.
And because I think from hearing your patterns and your symptoms, that might be where the dysfunction is. And if we start in addressing that root cause, then the rest of this may improve. And you don't necessarily need to spend all that money on that testing.
It's funny you mentioned gut health because my one older son, he's 25, has had the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, some really crazy gut issues. And then it seems like, okay, now my great nephew has gut issues and my girlfriend's daughter has gut issues and my other nephew has gut issues. And you're like, what is going on? Have you noticed that you're having more patients coming in with gut issues?
Yeah, I think a lot of people walk around feeling, and women especially, that bloating is normal, right? Or because you're female, you should think bloating is a normal consequence of life. And no, not necessarily. It really isn't. And so, yes, I can sometimes joke in my clinic, there's an epidemic of what I call SIBO, or dysbiosis, an overgrowth of bacteria in the upper intestines, leading to things like bloating, right? Leading to things like constipation and diarrhea. And when you have that domino cascade effect of creating inflammation in the gut and imbalances of good and bad bacteria in the gut, that has pretty systemic consequences in the body, right? That is why people sometimes will have brain fog or can't concentrate, because the neurotransmitters for the brain are made in the gut. That's why I'll have high performing individuals come in and say, I'm getting sick all the time. One of my kind of best patients came in. He was a 35-year-old financial advisor, had 2 kids, and he's, I'm always getting sick and it's wiping me out and it's taking me out of meetings, right? I can't stay
Yeah.
focused and I'm not as productive and it's impacting the growth of my business. And when we
Yeah.
actually dug deeper, it was actually that he had dysbiosis in the gut, which is where you also make your kind of proteins or your immunoglobulins for fighting infection.
Hmm.
Right? So it was no
Yeah.
surprise why he was constantly getting sick all the time because of this dysbiosis in the gut. And to your point earlier, it's an endemic issue for a lot of reasons, right? We have high stress, which impacts our ability
Hmm.
to properly digest foods in the stomach and produce the right type of acid to start the
Hmm.
digestive process. It starts to weaken our
Yeah.
bile flow, which helps us further digest foods and break that down. We take antibiotics all the time, right? So,
That messes us up for sure.
exactly. So just as part of the consequence of everyday life. And unfortunately, the traditional approach in medicine of if you have a cold, here's a Z-Pack, people end up getting predisposed to these digestive problems.
You want to hear something crazy? Back in the day, they said I had a micro prolapse valve. So every time I went to the dentist, I had to take an antibiotic.
Yeah.
And I was living in Houston at the time, and I'd fly home to Michigan, and then I go, I'll just go to my dentist in Michigan. And I'm like, every time I come here, I get sick, I feel horrible, and it was the antibiotic. So you're thinking like, oh, it's preventative. You're just messing with me doing all of that. And then I wonder, even like I was noticing in myself that after I eat, even if sometimes if I like yesterday was a perfect example, threw me off. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to have some bone broth for like my breakfast. I'm just going to have light bone broth. And I got so tired afterwards. I'm like, why am I tired? Like I felt like all the blood went from my brain down to my stomach. And that's part of that brain fog and tired stuff. What are you finding are you getting some of that coming in as well?
Yeah,
Is it blood sugar spike or?
yeah, it could be anything. That can be pretty diverse, right? So if we see that
Mhm.
correlation as it relates to digestion, it could be back to the patterns I was talking about earlier, where you're not absorbing the micronutrients, like the key micronutrients that you need to support mitochondrial cells, right? The cells that
Mhm.
produce ATP or energy, right? Without getting kind of too far in
Yeah.
the weeds of the biology, right? You have these cells whose
Yeah.
whole job is to produce energy, and that's all dependent
Mhm.
on micronutrients and oxygen, right? And so if you're not absorbing key B vitamins, if you're not absorbing key antioxidants, your cells that produce energy don't have the raw building blocks they need. So that means you end up being foggy despite getting 8 hours of
Yeah.
sleep, or you kind of crash at 2 p.m. because the brain sucks up 20% of our energy utilization despite being 2% of our body weight. Right. So it's just
Yeah.
constantly demanding that energy.
That we're getting. All right. I want to dive into cholesterol.
Okay.
I am so confused. It's like, go on a statin. Don't go on a statin. Statins are bad. Statins are going to cause you dementia, and statins really aren't great. Oh, people that are centurions really have higher cholesterol. No, you definitely don't listen to that. You definitely need to go on statins. You need your LDL lower. And then if, oh, well,
Round and round
just
we
do this
go.
formula of triglycerides with your LDL and HDL, blah, blah, blah. And then, anyways, it's just really confusing. Can you clarify what do we should be doing? What should we really have as cholesterol?
If you want clarification, I'm going to answer it depends, right? So it depends on the individual
No.
that sits in front of me, right? And the one thing I dislike about conventional medicine is the reductionist thinking, right? Which is this
Mm-hmm.
idea that everyone walking around absolutely needs a LDL, the bad cholesterol, sitting below 100. It's not exactly how I have the conversation with my patients. I'm looking at overall cardiovascular risk and what are the
Okay.
other markers that we need to be cluing in on to gauge your risk, to then have
Yeah.
an informed and educated conversation with my patients so they feel like they're in a position to make a decision whether the risk of taking a statin is worth the benefit, or maybe the risk is not worth
Mm-hmm.
the benefit. And there's other pieces of the puzzle that need to be evaluated besides just total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. Some of those things might include the size of the particles of cholesterol. So there's
Mm-hmm.
multiple layers to the story, right? So you have big, round, fluffy LDL particles and little small dense particles. And it's the little small dense
Mm-hmm.
particles that are the ones that can start to layer in and embed in your blood vessels.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have what I call these radioactive LDL particles, or in science terms, oxidized LDL particles,
Mm-hmm.
which then create more damage as they start to lay down in the vessel, and you start
Mm-hmm.
creating more inflammation around that plaque buildup, and then it finally ruptures. Right? And that's also the
Yeah.
concept of the ApoB marker that people sometimes talk about, which is how much of these LDL particles are penetrating into the your kind of microvasculature in your blood vessels. And then what are overall inflammation levels in the body? Right? So
Ah.
high sensitivity CRP is a marker you're going to find on some of those more advanced testing going beyond
Mm-hmm.
micronutrients. You're going to be looking at things like homocysteine, which not only looks at detoxification pathways in the body, but also inflammation within the vasculature, the blood vessel system,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so rounding back to your question, those are the things that I think ultimately allows us to have a conversation around whether the statin makes sense or doesn't make sense. So let's say your LDL cholesterol is 105 or 110, and you have very low levels of inflammation, right? Your high sensitive CRP is less than 1, and your homocysteine is
Mm-hmm.
less than 5, and you have normal oxidized LDL, but you have a strong family history of Alzheimer's disease, right? Your mom has it, and your mom's had it. Then you might start to have a conversation with the patient in front of me, which is maybe it might not be worth the risk of taking that just to get your
Yeah.
cholesterol down 15 points. So hopefully that kind of answers a little bit of the
It
question.
does. And didn't they say some statins don't breach the blood barrier, brain blood barrier, so they're not at risk for causing dementia or Alzheimer's, and others do? Is that true?
Yeah, it's a little bit of the pharmacokinetics or the properties of the medication. So I think you're talking about the difference between maybe like atorvastatin or rovastatin. And there's kind of some thoughts that some have less of that risk profile. Yes,
Yeah.
when we have that conversation with patients that are weary or concerned about statins, there might be some that we have a conversation about that may be a better place to start, or they may be more comfortable with that. There's even modified dosing protocols you can have conversations around. But there are other natural supplements like citronol that have been shown to modify lipoprotein A and ApoB that may be a different alternative that you may want to have a conversation with your functional practitioner.
All right, I'm already on my second page of notes, okay? Just not saying. All right, and then also, shouldn't someone get tested in the cholesterol vein too, in heart health, about doing like I did a calcium test, and then I can't remember the name of it, but the one for your neck arteries,
Yep.
that plays a role too, doesn't it?
Yeah, we could spend a whole hour just talking about cardiovascular health and how do you evaluate that and risk profile it. And those are other tests, layers
Mm-hmm.
beyond the particle size and the oxidized DL and the inflammation markers. Then we look at the actual plaque burden you have, right? So doing a
Yeah.
CT scan that looks at how much plaque is built up in the arteries of the heart. If you have a 0 marker, very reassuring. If you have more than
Yeah.
0, we don't quite know what that means in terms of future risk. We know there's plaque buildup.
Yeah.
And then to your point, looking at the carotid arteries in the neck and how much plaque built up there. So you're getting a total idea of, is this cholesterol of LDL of 120 causing you to actually build up a lot of plaque or not? So it's just another layer of information to then make an educated decision on how you're going to go about trying to modify and prevent
Test.
having a heart attack or a stroke.
So you have a framework that you start with your patients. Tell us about your framework.
Yeah, so it's something like over years I've started down this pathway of integrative functional medicine and really attuned into the cellular medicine piece of this with
Mm-hmm.
another one of my mentors, Dr. Bill Seeds. And this kind of concept that he spends a lot of time talking about redox, which is one part of my methodology, which is this balance of the cell creating energy and then repairing from the damage. But what I have found is if you jump in to the deep end and start trying to repair the cell with all these cool tools that you hear on social media, like peptides and stem
Yes.
cells and hyperbaric oxygen, and you don't focus on the foundations of which the environment in which the cell lives, detox. All right. So to me,
Okay.
that's the foundation of optimizing cellular health, which is creating a healthy environment for the cell to live in to begin with, right? So we talked earlier about some of those toxins. We talked about heavy metals specifically, but there
Mm-hmm.
are a lot of other toxins that we are exposed to and around us every day. I think one of the statistics that that jumps out at me that's a little bit of alarming is it's estimated that 50% of residents, commercial or home residents, have mold in them, right?
Oh yeah.
Mycotoxins,
In Houston, for sure. There's mold in probably every house in Houston.
right? And some individuals that doesn't have an impact or consequence, or at least not today. And there may be a
Mm-hmm.
tipping point in which that becomes a problem. When we exceed our body's natural detoxification capacity, those toxins then have a pretty significant harmful effect, and usually multi-systemic, multiple parts of the body, right? One of the most concerning for me for
Mm-hmm.
mold is, you talked about earlier, risk for Alzheimer's and dementia. Right. Our understanding of Alzheimer's is multifactorial, but Dr. Dale Bredesen talks about the concept of this toxic pattern, and that toxic pattern of mycotoxins, mold, and contributing to amyloid beta production in the brain, that plaque that
Yeah.
leads to and contributes to dementia. So looking at things like mycotoxins alongside heavy metals, or even just overall environmental toxin load. So your herbicides and your pesticides, the glyphosates of the world, like how much total body burden do you have? Because it reaches a tipping point where your body's natural detoxification pathways can't clear it.
So in those micronutrients tests, does that also test for microtoxins? Can you get your body tested for all those toxins? I guess mold. I know there's a mold test you can test your body for, but
Exactly. And there's different ways to go about doing it. A lot of times the heavy metals can be done. Some of those can be done via blood. By and large, you'll see a lot of functional medicine practitioners doing urine testing to look at mycotoxins, to look at the environmental toxins, and even in the excretion of heavy metals. So that's my go-to in my clinical practice, is using urine-based testing
okay.
to look at all three of those categories. Sometimes you can see patterns of diminished detoxification pathways on those micronutrients. Right. So if I see a patient
Yeah.
struggling with low glutathione levels, or a patient struggling with low cysteine levels, right, I'm seeing patterns that the body is having to utilize a lot of these nutrients to address detoxification pathways in the body. And there's a big demand, and your body's sucking that up, because those could be patterns
Yeah.
that lead me down the direction of recommending toxin testing. But
Mhm.
I generally advocate that as a starting point. Because again, we can talk about this today, but you can jump in and start using tools like peptides and hyperbaric oxygen. But if you don't have the foundation in which your cells can optimally respond to that, sometimes you're just wasting time and money.
So you might jump in and do that, but you're not absorbing any of it. So like you're going and getting more in the oxygen chamber, but you're like, it's not doing so good. Maybe you're getting 10% or 20% of the benefit.
Correct.
Okay. What about saunas? How do you feel about saunas?
Yeah, a big fan of sauna. To me, one of the concepts and constructs, again, to my mentor Andrew Weil, he always taught me to think through what is the overall potential for good, and what is the level of
Mhm.
evidence behind that, and what's the potential for something to cause harm. And to me, sauna
Mhm.
does have a lot of good evidence, and not very harmful, and overall generally not terribly costly. Right, there's an expense for
Yeah.
getting a quality sauna in your house that's not made with wood with toxins that you're leaching in when you're trying to do your sauna.
Oh yeah,
Um,
there's that too. I didn't think about that.
yeah. So there's all these variables you have to think about, but sauna does help your body, especially infrared sauna. You tap into one of your major detoxification organs, which is your skin,
Mhm.
right? And so you're able to kind of start to mobilize and push out and excrete some toxins. You have to do that with some regularity to get that benefit,
Yeah.
right? So jumping in the sauna once a week or once or twice a month is probably not going to cut it. But
Do you like infrared better than the dry sauna?
so infrared, there's kind of some thoughts where that infrared is further helping facilitate that. So
Mhm.
to me, if you're going to invest the time and then dollars into it, I would go with the infrared route.
Okay. And then what about NAD supplements? I've heard a lot about that.
This keeps going back to a concept we've talked about a couple times, which is mitochondrial health, right? And if we want to simplify this without getting too far in the weeds of biochemical pathways, the way I describe the NAD is a supercharged version of vitamin B3, niacinamide, or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And that is needed for these mitochondrial cells to move electrons around to make this ATP and energy. Right? And sometimes it might be a good jumping off point or a starting point to charge the mitochondrial cells a little bit. But I think there's still a lot we don't understand exactly what's happening when you flood the cells with NAD and what impact that might have if you're doing that week in and week out, month in, month out. So it's not that I don't use NAD with my patients, but thinking about that strategically and for what time period should we be using the NAD? And ultimately, to my earlier point, can we create the environment within the cell, within the body, to elicit its own innate healing response or its ability to optimize function and production of NAD on its own, or recycle? Most of the NAD in our body is actually recycled. So can you actually improve that process? A lot of times I'll use tools like on a peptide called 5-amino-1-MQ, which helps your body produce and recycle and utilize its own NAD, as opposed to just loading a body up with NAD in and out.
Yeah. And so a case in point is a lot of us are maybe not going to the doctor, getting our blood work done. And they're like, oh, NAD sounds good. They're saying it's really good for me. Let me just start taking that. Oh, DHEA, that sounds good. Let me start taking that. So then you're loading up, but you don't know if it's good for you or not. And then I've heard even some people like getting toxicity from it. So you really do have to be careful.
You don't understand the consequences of that. Dr. C says, once we start thinking we're smarter than the cell and we know how to outsmart the cells, is when we really get in trouble with some of these tools, right? And so, and that's this idea, to your point, is just supplementing blindly.
Yeah. And even then, sometimes they don't tell you, oh, you should be. I even had my vitamin D levels because I was taking a multivitamin, and then I was taking vitamin D with my magnesium at night. It was too much. Yeah. I started creeping up to get too high vitamin D. They're like, whoa, pull back. And I go, oh, yeah, I guess because I'm taking double during the day with that. So you really got to be careful. You think you're doing good and you're not. So the advice, what's your ending advice for everybody?
Any advice is what we spent a lot of time talking about today, which is start with some sort of baseline understanding of where your body is and how primed is your body for optimal healing and repair by getting and partnering with a kind of knowledgeable, seasoned functional integrative medicine practitioner who can help you interpret these labs and develop a personalized plan for you, and then recheck in on that plan. And make those tweaks and adjustments and help you guide you through everything that you're being inundated with in social media. And they become a trusted advisor of somebody you can check in and say, hey, like I have one patient who comes in, we just sit down once a quarter and she's just picking my brain of everything she's seen online and wants to know, okay, where does this fit for me personally? And we have a conversation to help her guide her through that.
So I hate to say this, but I did put all my blood work into AI and said, okay, here's my last 4 blood works. What's gotten better? What's gotten worse? What do you think I should do? I don't know if it was right or wrong, but it said Mediterranean diet and you need some things that need to still be fixed. Yeah, but I agree. So the big lesson, everybody, is before you supplement, get tested and do a deep dive on all of these things. And I didn't know about getting tested on micronutrients. So blood work and micronutrients, and make a plan and get somebody that you really trust. William, tell people where they can find you and connect with you, and maybe hire you to do this would be great.
My clinical practice, Vive Wellness, VYVE Wellness. You can learn more there at vivewellness.com/get/started. And it's a great place where you can enter your information and jump on a free discovery call with one of my team members. And then we also have a cellular health assessment that you can take online. You'll find on the homepage just right below the fold. And that'll be a great place for you to kind of learn a little bit more about where some areas of your cellular health need to be optimized, whether it's the detox, redox, or repair pathway.
Yeah, That sounds awesome. We'll put all those in the show notes. Everybody, I have a lot of notes. Go back and listen to this more than once if you really want to really get this absorbed and know what you're supposed to do and get all the information. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a great week. And if you're looking to write a book and become an international award-winning bestseller, reach out to us. We guarantee that. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.